Hey guys, for my podcast this week, I'll be talking about journalistic bias. So I'm focusing mostly on chapter 4 in Williams. So in this chapter, he talks a lot about how media is organized and how this affects the content that is produced. He said that there are 3 different levels to focus on when looking into media organization. The first level is focused on the individual professional who's contributing to the media content. It is important to look at their preferences, their social background, experience, values, beliefs, and ideologies. Going along with this, David Manning also came up with the idea that there are people who serve as gatekeepers in the news media. These individuals will determine what stories will be selected and will deem what stories are newsworthy. He said that those gatekeepers' backgrounds, their beliefs, ideologies, and all of that are reflected in the news that is presented to the audience. The second level that is important to observe when studying media organization is the organizational structures and routines. This looks at the media as a business with certain goals and policies. Williams stresses the importance of routines in an organization, meaning that a media organization will have a certain order and routine in the work that they do. The process of creating news content, for example, is done in a certain way that has worked for the organization in the past. An organization could also negatively influence their workers and individual journalists by having them conform in a particular way. The third level is the interaction between the media organizations and the environment around them, including the social, political, and cultural factors. This is more focused on looking at what a society or culture does to influence a media organization and lead them to create certain content or choose certain stories to be important. Although we may feel that a certain news organization has a great amount of power, they could be controlled by outside sources that limit or choose what is told to them as newsworthy. So, for example, a lot of news stations get most of their information from law enforcement, government officials, and people like that. So those people could control what's actually being put out there in the media. It's important to acknowledge that all these levels, when thinking about journalistic bias, I think we often just blame the individual journalist if we notice a particular bias, but we also need to understand that there are many other factors and influences. So Williams said, the claim of the new media to simply reflect what is happening out there by holding up a mirror to the world throws out a challenge to media scholars to test the veracity of such a claim. So in this quote, he's basically saying that it's really difficult to claim that media is simply just a reflection of what's going on in the world. There's many other factors involved at an individual, organizational, and social level. So all of this ties into ideas about agency and structure. It invites to ask the question of how much agency a journalist really has if they're part of an organization, or how much agency an organization has if they're being influenced by these social factors or cultural factors. At the individual level, a journalist can conform to what's expected of them, or they can go against these expectations and not follow the norms of the organization. The Marxist approach says that the media organizations are tied to dominant institutions and therefore influenced by these institutions. So that basically means the Marxist perspective is pretty pessimistic in saying that the media industry and everyone in it has absolutely no agency because they're serving the interests of the dominant culture and acting as mouthpieces or megaphones for the dominant culture's views, opinions, and interpretations. So my example for this is more on a personal level. So this year I've been really lucky to be able to have an experience working in a news station as an intern. So because of this experience, I feel like I'm better able to understand the idea of journalistic bias a lot better. although I can understand that each individual has their own bias simply because of their own values and experiences and backgrounds, I feel like the newsroom is as an organization, tries to remain as unbiased as possible. Many of the sources for news come from the government or other institutions, so I definitely think it's possible that these people have a lot of say when it comes to what's newsworthy. But when the newsroom is selecting news stories, everyone in the newsroom comes together to pitch their story ideas that they think are the most newsworthy and interesting. And from there, the group selects the ideas that they think are the best, and they go from there. And I feel like Williams offered a more pessimistic perspective of the news media, and although I acknowledge that many of the ideas he presented are important to understand, my experience in the newsroom hasn't really allowed me to see as much of the negative biases that come from journalists and news organizations.